this. Hello and welcome to the Dr. Elisa Show here on KUHS Denver, the Stream, my favorite radio station. How are you doing today? I know I say this every time, you're probably tired of hearing it, but I missed you. This is the high point for me, is being able to come on and talk with all of you. So thank you so much for joining me. If it's your first time, the show is based on inspiring each of you. My tagline is igniting a renaissance of spirit, and that's my goal. What I'm hoping is by the end of the show, you have more questions, new thoughts. You feel inspired to look something up, to read a book, especially today. Something that you just feel allows you, helps you to shift in some way. Maybe move that needle that we've all had stuck on fear and worry and concern over to hope. Wouldn't that be a lovely kind of movement for an hour today? So thank you so much for joining me. If you have not been listening before, the show's a mixture of psychology, spirituality, has some Jewish seasoning to it, sometimes astrology, but this show is spiritually multilingual. I want to really emphasize that. Sometimes we listen to something and somebody says the word God, and we don't believe in God. Well, then just translate it into universal energy or guiding spirit or karma, whatever works for you. If I say meditation and that doesn't work for you, change it into prayer. The conversations are rich when we're willing to be multilingual, so just give that a shot. I also want to do a shout out today. As you know, one of my goals for us all is to be a philanthropist this year. And you can be a philanthropist with $1 a month, whatever you can afford. And sometimes I have to tell you that $1 a month means a great deal in some other nonprofit situation. This year I am supporting the MS Society. I have a big hike coming up the end of July. I'll do an entire show on MS, and I'll let you know when that's coming up. But think about a society, an organization, a nonprofit that means something to you. And an easy way to be a philanthropist, save whatever change you have in your pocket at the end of the day. And at the end of the month or the year, take that and give it to some organization near you. So, just one of the things I'm encouraging us to do. As far as me, you know who I am. I get to say Dr. Elisa, I've got a PhD in psych. I'm a professional astrologer. I work with people on finding their soul's journey, their soul's craving. And I'm also an author. You can find me at elisarobin.com. Talks about my readings and my sessions, also my books. So my first novel is The Way of the Well. It's a spiritual mystic adventure with a bit of romance in it. And you can find it on Amazon. I'm in editorial stages for my second book. Also have a leadership book out there, Pirate Wisdom, for those of you who struggle with fitting into your organization. It's really about dealing with the politics. And you can find me on Facebook, Lisa Robin, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, but at elisarobin.com, and would love to talk with you and schedule a session. So, enough about me. You do know that when I bring a guest on, it's because somebody has inspired me. So I'm bringing guests on that I've had some kind of interaction with their work. And I am beyond excited today because I have this amazing woman coming on. Absolutely amazing. So I'll tell you who she is, and then I'll tell you how she inspired me. Her name is Sarah Hurwitz, and I actually heard her speak. This was my first experience with her at a virtual Jewish women's event based out of Denver. And she wrote a book called Here All Along, and she was talking about it while she was being interviewed, and it was about her journey back into Judaism and finding a deeper connection to life. And while I'm on this virtual conference with my computer, my laptop, I get on my desktop and I order her book on Amazon because I'm so inspired by her. It showed up, I read it in probably 3 sessions, like just, you know, when you've got a PhD in something, you're very good at speed reading. So I just sort of tore through the book, and then I went back and savored it. And I am just so excited. Sarah, thank you for being with me today. I'm so excited to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here and really looking forward to a good conversation.
This is great. So, you know, you have found, so I'm not even going to tell your history, I'm going to let you do that, but you, through a lot of interesting journeys on circuitous paths, you found your life direction. And I think it's about helping inspire people into have sort of a spiritual renaissance, and finding their spiritual voice. I think that's important to you. Can you just talk about that journey?
Yeah, sure. You know, it's funny. I grew up with very little religious or spiritual background. You know, my family's Jewish. We kind of half-heartedly went to the synagogue services at the major Jewish holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I had a bat mitzvah, and that was about it. You know, I didn't love Hebrew school. I didn't see anything that was particularly meaningful to me. So I just thought, okay, if I want to find meaning or spirituality or connection, I'll just have to look elsewhere. I'm a cultural Jew, right? I'm Jewish by heritage.
Yeah, right.
But fast forward 25 years later, I broke up with a guy I was dating at the age of 36, and I had all this free time on my hands, and I happened to hear about an Intro to Judaism class happening in Washington, D.C., where I live, and I signed up totally on a whim. You know, people often say, oh, you were in crisis, you were on a journey, you were looking for me. No, just bored, a little lonely. It was something to do on a Wednesday night. I wish there was some profound thing, but it wasn't. It was a whim. I thought, oh, I should learn about my heritage. But what I found in this class just blew me away. It was 4,000 years of crowdsourced wisdom from millions of people about what it means to be human, how to be a good person, how to live a worthy, meaningful, purposeful life, how to find profound spiritual connection. It was not God is a man in the sky who controls everything. It was this incredibly diverse, sophisticated theology, and I just thought, where has this been all my life? And if I'm just learning about this now, lots of other Jews might not know about it either, and lots of people who are not Jewish might not know about it either, right? Who knows about that much about traditions outside of their own? I just thought I would love to share what I found with others. You know, I wanted to write the book that was not just kind of an intro how-to book, nor did I want to write some esoteric, academic, sophisticated books. I don't like reading those. I wanted to write a book that shares the most moving, inspiring, transformative wisdom that this ancient tradition of Judaism has to offer, both for Jews and people of all faith backgrounds and none.
Wow. I love finding these sort of synchronicity links between my guests and myself. And I had an experience where I went back and studied, and it was not quite a whim, but I was meeting people who seemed to really be able to talk about their religion. And my background was sort of similar to yours. I had done a little study, but not much. And then I, sort of on a whim, signed up for a class. Blew my mind. This is it. I had no idea this is it. Right?
I know. Because, and look, our synagogue services on the big holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that is not our most accessible work. Right? I think if those are your only 2 points of contact with Judaism, you're not necessarily going to walk away thinking, oh, this religion has profound wisdom and spiritual connection to offer me now on a daily basis in my life. You won't necessarily see it, but it does. And I actually think all the world's great religious traditions have moral wisdom to offer.
Yes.
Right? They're all part of what, I forget who it was who said this, but someone once said there's a religious ecosystem in the world. So in a sense that each religion is offering its own piece of the pie of moral wisdom, right? Each one offers something valuable and important, and if you lose any one of them, the ecosystem gets out of balance. And I just love that. I absolutely love that. So I love to learn about other traditions, and I'm excited to share mine with people.
That's this sort of brilliant, just sort of opened my mind that that they're all sort of threads in a tapestry, and that if when you take out some of the threads, you lose the wisdom and the experience and the depth that tradition has to offer, right? But they're all, then when they're in a tapestry, they blend, they support each other. So an ecosystem is so profoundly different than these separate, disparate beliefs. That's wow. Thank you. I wrote that down.
Yes,
that's
really it's not. I can't take credit for the. I can't take credit for the term. I forget who said it, but I love that phrase. I think it's perfectly descriptive.
So, can you talk a little more about the sort of the process of this for you? You started with the whim, you discovered, but there's a long piece. There's like a journey between I had a whim and I wrote a book. So
there is a very long journey. That is.
And go ahead, talk.
Yeah. No, it's such a great question, because I took this first class and I thought, oh my God, I need to learn more. So then I took another intro class, which my friends found hilarious. One of my friends was like, come on. Do you walk in there and say, I'm Sarah Hurwitz? And does everyone say, okay, who brought the ringer? I mean, really? Sarah Hurwitz? I'm so Jewish, but I didn't know a lot about, I hardly knew anything about my tradition. I almost related more to the people who were converting in my class than to the people who've been born Jewish, because it was like a process of new discovery. So I took that additional class. I started attending any lecture, speech, one-off class I could, and I read hundreds of books. And I read intro books. I read more sophisticated books. I mean, I was just endlessly reading and reading. And as I started getting more engaged in classes and testing out, attending services, I was just meeting more and more people in the Jewish community, both in Washington, D.C., where I live, and nationally and internationally. And so I began to meet people who became mentors, teachers, rabbis, chavruta, meaning, a study partner, people who I study with. And I just was really moved. So there was a lot of learning, and there was also the experiential piece, which is also a critical part of learning. So I started attending week-long silent Jewish meditation retreats, which were transformational for me. I started, attending Shabbat dinners with my friends who were quite observant, and being incredibly moved by the way that they create what Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel calls a palace in time, right? I think it's a sanctuary in time. Just the texture of time is actually different when you're with people who are observing Shabbat in a rigorous way. It's quite moving. So I just, between the book learning, the experiential learning, I just kept going, and it was hard. I'll tell you.
Well, you had a full-time job.
I had a full-time job,
right? And a big job. Do you want to mention what your job was?
So I was in the Obama administration in the White House, and for the first year and a half or 2 years, I was a senior speechwriter for President Obama, and then I switched over to being head speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. So definitely busy. Definitely busy job. Right. But I think what the challenge with Judaism is that there's no beginning. Right, everything is hyperlinked to everything else. So, even if you just you kind of have to just dive in and learn as you go, and you can't really just learn one thing without kind of learning everything else. So it was, I wrote my book in part because it took me about 3,000 hours to figure out what on earth was going on and to distill what I thought were the most helpful teachings to me. I just thought, man, if I can save other people that time, I'm going to try to do that. And just give them an entry point. That's what I tried to do.
And you do it in a lovely way. You said I've got all these notes, things I want to talk about. A couple of the things that fascinate me is that notion that with Judaism and perhaps with other religions, there is no entry point. You just dive in wherever you are, whatever the study group's doing, and then you go, and it expands and it grows, and it is like everything is hyperlinked to each other. I discovered that early on.
Yes. And I think once you have, I think it's good to get the basics, right? Take an intro course, read an intro book, and once you've done that, dive deeply in whatever you're passionate about. Right. If you're in spirituality, go there. Ethics, go there. Holidays, go there. And you'll keep learning everything else because, as we said, it's all hyperlinked.
It's all hyperlinked. And I'm sure that's true in other customs and other religions.
Sure.
We only see this sort of surface piece of it, right? The major holidays in any religion. what's fascinating to me, there's a couple things and I think you probably know this, the largest number of converts to Buddhism in America are Jews. And
Yes.
they're looking for the things that Judaism has, but we never knew Judaism has, right? Meditation, all of those deep, rich things. You say something in your book about our relationship with religion is based on our childhood understanding. So can you, because that's really what you're saying. You had this understanding, and then you took these classes, and you had this other understanding. Can you expand on that?
Yes, I mean, that's right on. I think that's just right on. Because what happens with so many Jews, I'm talking about myself, we go to Hebrew school, we become a bar bat mitzvah, and we stop learning at age 12 or 13. And then, then we go to college and we study Eastern religion and Western philosophy, and we say, well, this is where it's at. This is sophisticated. This is exciting and interesting. Judaism, so childish, it's so obsolete. Well, yeah, because you have a 12-year-old's understanding of it, right? If you take a college-level Intro to Judaism class, then you're going to actually see how sophisticated and great it is. And this cycle continues, right? We stop learning at 13. 20 years later, you have a kid, and you think, well, someone's got to make this kid Jewish. Well, it's not me. I don't know anything. I'll dump it all on some Hebrew school teacher. And, a Hebrew school teacher can't make your kid Jewish. Your kid then does the pediatric Judaism, as Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman calls it.
Right.
They become a bar bat mitzvah, and then they do the same thing 20 years later with their kids. We have to grow up. You've got to become an adult Jew. People ask me all the time, well, how do I make my kid Jewish? And my answer is by becoming an adult Jew yourself.
That's right.
Then you'll know, right? Then you'll know. And I had to do it myself, and it's not easy, but it is so worth it. There's so much there to find.
Right. So let's dig a bit in, and before I do that, if you've just tuned in, you are listening to the Dr. Elisa Show with the amazing Sarah Hurwitz on KUHS Denver, the stream. And you already missed good stuff, but thank you for tuning in now. So one of the things, and I've got your book here because I have pages marked, you have in here, and I'm hoping we can talk about this, Rabbi Greenberg's 3 truths, which you have early in your book, because I think it's important. So I don't expect you to have them memorized. We're each.
Yeah, no problem. I can talk about it.
Okay, good. You want me to read one? You want to just go for it?
Either way, you go. I'm happy to do it. You do it.
Okay, you do it.
Okay, so this is, there's this core, I think probably the most core animating Jewish idea is that we're all created in the image of God, right? Which you can believe in God, don't believe in God, doesn't matter. What this means, basically what this means as interpreted both by Jewish tradition and as beautifully expressed, as you said, by Rabbi Greenberg, is that it means that we all have 3, as he puts it, inalienable dignities. Number 1, we are each infinitely worthy. You cannot put a price on a human life.
Right.
Number 2, we're all equal. No one's better or worse no one's more or less valuable than anyone else. And number 3 is that we're all unique. There is no one else on this planet like us. And that is such a profound idea. And you might say, well, that's obvious. We all know that, but we don't live like that. If we did, why would we ever let some kids go to crumbling schools and some kids to great schools? Why would some people be homeless and some people be living in mansions? That would be intolerable if we actually believed that.
Right.
But we don't.
So take that a little bit further, because Judaism, in my experience, the things I've learned, is an orthopraxy as opposed to a theocracy. So in a theocracy is the way I believe. I have to believe a certain way, and that makes me a certain religion. Judaism is, belief's a little fuzzy. What are you doing? So can you, because you started down that pathway with these 3 truths, that if we're Jewish, we have to do something about these 3 truths. Is that correct?
100%. And this is why I love studying Jewish ethics, because our laws, our ethics are actually how we put this truth into practice. And it drives me crazy when I hear that old lie that Christianity is a religion of love and Judaism is a religion of law. What an ignorant thing to say. Our laws are how we embody and reflect and live out love every single day. They're how we live out that core in the image idea. So when you study Jewish law, you might think, well, this is very in the weeds, right? If you study if you study, you know, how to give money to those in need, it's not just like give this much.
Right.
It's like exactly how much and precisely how you give it, and do you give in a way that respects someone's dignity, that doesn't humiliate them.
Right.
Then you go deep into the weeds of like, if you loan someone money and you know they can't pay you back, try not to run into them on the street because you might embarrass them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, man, we're getting that specific? But the answer is yes, because Jewish law in its gritty, granular way is pushing us to consider the in the image, innate human dignity of every single person that we run into. So I actually need to think, hey, you know what? If I run into this person who's indebted to me, that's going to humiliate them. I'm just going to walk the other way. There's no need, right? There's no need to surprise them. And what a beautiful thing that is.
Right. I know. There's some of my favorite pieces are: do not put a stumbling block in front of someone who's blind, and do not slander someone who's deaf. And the detail you go into that, am I blind to the way to dress a way to go to school? Am I blind about getting a job because I never had to do it? Am I blind in terms of writing a resume or how one behaves? Help people. Don't put stumbling blocks, right? And so what I love is that on the one hand, and I think so many people do this, and no blame, but so many people read what we call Torah, which would be Jewish scriptures, Jewish Bible, and think it's literal, and only literal, right? And it's all these other layers, right, that are expressed in the Talmud, which is, I don't even know how big that is, like, you know.
Oh my gosh, like 2
I
million
don't
words
know,
or something?
I know, 36 volumes or something like that. I mean, like,
it's
gigantic.
I mean, that is exactly right. It drives me crazy when someone once said to me, a very smart person said, well, I'm Jewish, but I could never practice Judaism because I've read the Torah and it's filled with violence and sexism. It's like, okay, friend, the Torah is 2,500 years old.
Right.
We have spent the last 2,500 years old interpreting the Torah, so guess what? If you put my eye out, I don't put yours eye out. That's not how it works. You have to monetarily compensate me because 2,000 years ago, ancient rabbis reinterpreted that. It's just like what we do with the U.S. Constitution. We don't allow slavery anymore. Women can vote. We reinterpret it.
Right.
And when people don't know that basic process of Judaism, they misinterpret it. You don't read the Torah literally. You interpret it. It's been interpreted for 2,500 years. And that is such a core truth about Judaism.
And I do love that statement you have, that the Torah, that those laws are, how do you build a loving community? How do you live in a loving way, in a respectful way in the world, and still take care of yourself? It's both of those. I find that paradox is alive and well within the Jewish tradition. Just one little piece, and then I got another question for you, but we believe that God, or Hashem, knows everything you're going to do. However, you also have free will to not do that. And I love that. I love that we get to live in the middle of a bunch of paradox. So, yes, both of those are true.
So much paradox in Judaism. Yes, it's complex. There's not dogma. There's not simplicity. You're always going to, you know, I remember reading somewhere that you know that something is a particularly deep truth when its opposite is also true. I just thought that was such an amazing idea, right? It's like, you know, I just think that is when you actually think about the deepest truth, like its opposite is also true. So it's like, you know, you have to take care of yourself first. You really got to put on your own safety mask first, and take care of others.
Yes.
Right? Both true. They're both true, and you have to hold both of those truths. And I think that complexity is something I love about Judaism.
I think it's why you don't hear Jewish pithy slogans. Judaism is about, right? I mean, we need like paragraphs as opposed to, right? And I'm not criticizing. I mean, I love the notion that all you need is love. It just hasn't functioned very well in my life as sort of the main guiding light of everything I do.
This is why it's so hard to translate Judaism, because you're right, it can't be boiled down to something really simplistic. You know, you can make one statement. You can never say, well, Jewish law says X. You can say it's always going to be, well, the majority sense of Jewish law is X, but there is a minority that says Y, and then there's a few people who say Z, and here's how they come together, and here it's going to be complex.
And all of that's written in Talmud. We keep all the arguments, right? We keep everybody's opinion and read them all together, which is another thing I love. It's like saving all the elements of a debate. And some of these people lived hundreds of years apart, thousands of years apart, and yet we save that to savor it. Okay, so we could just do that for a while, but you talked about one of the things that moved you was going to a retreat. And I have to say that retreats are not my thing, but I've been to a couple, and they've always been, right, the Jewish ones have always been a bit transformational. So can you talk about that, and especially hipodidut, I'm going to say it wrong, hipodidut, right? Hipodidut.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
That's right.
All right, so now
That's right.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. So, when I've been learning about Judaism for a little while, and I happened to hear about a silent Jewish meditation retreat called Awakening the Divine, which seemed totally insane to me. But, I'd done meditation in a Jewish context. I'd done meditation in a Buddhist context, and I thought, oh, I didn't know this existed in a Jewish context. And so I decided to check it out. It was from a Tuesday to a Sunday over the December holidays one year, I think 2014. And I went in not knowing anyone there, not knowing what I was in for. And it was just this transformative experience. It was 5 days of meditation, prayer, beautiful lectures from the teachers who were really learned rabbis and educators. And, it was just the first time I had gotten a real break from the noise of daily life. And I found my mind getting quieter and quieter. And then one night, they said, we're going to do this centuries-old Jewish practice called hipodidut, which basically involves going out into nature, somewhere where no one can hear you, and talking out loud to God without stopping. So not in your head, the words have to come out of your mouth audibly, and you can't stop. So if you run out of things to say, you say, run out of things to say, nothing to say. And if you don't believe in God, fine. You say, I don't believe in you, this is dumb, why am I here? Fine. So I just thought this was so ridiculous. I was like, I'm not going to do this. What are you talking about? But then everyone else just got up and went to go do it. And I thought, okay. So I went out to do it. I found it very awkward. I was very hesitant. But, once I actually just followed the rules and did the exercise, I found it to be tremendously emotional. I found it to be very moving. And I felt like on that experience, after doing hipodidut with another few days of meditation, I just felt like I finally, for the first time, I just had a felt sense of the divine. I felt that I just touched into something both very intimate, but also just kind of boundless, that felt like this really loving energy, and it's something that I touch into only rarely. It's fleeting, but it was just tremendously moving, and that really set me on a course, a Jewish spiritual course since then.
So you just reiterated that paradox, something intimate and boundless, right?
Right. This is, this is the core Jewish teaching about the divine, is that we don't know. But we have the humility as Jews to say, when we talk about God or the divine, we are talking about something so far beyond what our tiny little human brains can define or categorize. To shrink God down to some kind of dogma that our little brains can process, that's to create an idol, right? That's making something infinite limited, right? That's idolatry. We don't do it. So what we have is we just have centuries and centuries of commentary. And like you just said, if you study the ancient rabbis, in one sentence they're saying that God is infinite, beyond all time, space, human imagination, and then the next sentence, God is right here in the world, you can talk to God, very intimate, very personal, very present.
Right.
Okay, those two things can't both be true, but
yeah, they are.
Okay, sure, right?
Sure.
They are, and you just, that's something I love about Jewish theology, is we don't do systemic theology. We have a sense that there is a divine out there, and that people have very different conceptions of what it is, but we do believe as Jews that divinity calls us to act in a certain way, right? That's something that we kind of agree on. We are called to act in a certain way, and that is captured in Jewish laws. Right. So I'm a fan of this.
So I've got 3 questions lining up in my head, or at least comments. Sort of the fascinating thing is we always then come back to action, right?
Yes.
I'm reminded of that whole story of Moses and God and Hashem, and you can't see me and whatever, but that that this is a still small voice inside of us. Is that, and so talking out loud, again, it seems like a paradox to listen for the still small voice. Did those come together somehow for you?
Yes, actually they did, because I think when you do this process of just talking out loud, unburdening yourself, you say things that surprise you. You actually kind of get in touch with things inside that you didn't quite know were there. And I really love that idea, that phrase, a still small voice, which is from the Hebrew Bible. You know, there is a sense in Jewish theological tradition of a divine within, some sense that we are, you know, there is a spark of the divine within each of us. And I think that the practice of hibodedut, of just talking without censoring, without editing, without any self-consciousness, to a being that knows you completely, that created you in some, you know, non-literal way, it's just you get in touch with something very deep.
So it would seem to me doing that, and I have to say I don't exactly do that, but my morning walks, when I'm alone, when there's no one around me, I sort of have this conversation out loud.
Yeah.
That what you're saying, we get past what we should say. Oh, I'm grateful for, gratitude's wonderful. I mean, I have a gratitude practice, but you know, sometimes I'm not grateful. Sometimes I'm cranky and I'm grumpy and I'm struggling and I don't know why this just happened. And what you're saying is, when we speak aloud to whatever this divinity, this divine, this whatever this is, that we allow ourselves to say the things that are deep within us, and we learn something else about ourselves.
Yes.
So, and then do we also learn something else about Hashem, about God, about the divine?
You know, it's funny, I can't remember, it's terrible that I can't remember who said the things that I keep quoting, but there is
okay, we'll Google them later. It's okay.
We'll Google them later. There's some notion that prayer is God talking to God. You know, if kind of we each have the divine within us, then it's kind of the divine speaking to the divine. So there's some sense that do you necessarily understand something about the divine? Maybe, maybe not. I've sometimes, in moments of hibodedut, wondered, like, am I saying this to the divine, or is the divine saying this to me? And by the way, I say the divine because I don't think God is a discrete being in the sky. Right? I don't think that. I think God is everything. I think it's the animating energy of all life. I think God is a force that, you know, makes us aspire to become our highest and truest selves. I think God is what arises in deep relation. I mean, these are all Jewish ideas from Martin Buber and Mordechai Kaplan and the mystics, but I relate to God as a you, because I can't relate to a force, right? My heart and mind are small, so they need human relation. You know, I think a tree probably has a different sense of relation to the divine. So yeah, it's Jewish, you know, Jewish theological complexity. It's pretty great.
That Spielberg talked to us about, right, about the force, right? That there is that Jewish notion showing up. There's something greater and bigger than all of us.
Yes, and there's an idea that it's not neutral, right? This force is not a neutral force, right? Which I think is important to just clarify. Like, this is a moral force. This is a force that demands certain things of us, and I think that's important, because I sometimes see people getting into the kind of, oh, the universe has my back, and there's just not really an expectation, right? It's all kind of the universe giving you things, but what are you know, where's the self-discipline, the self-sacrifice, all of that, because that's an important part of the spiritual life, I believe.
Right. So we're back to that paradox. Yes, I do feel supported, but I have to do mine, right? I actually, I have a bracelet on, and I don't want to talk about me too much, but there is this Jewish notion that our parents heard our Hebrew names, and that there is, I always say it wrong, a Pisukim for every one, and my Hebrew name is Chava Rachel, and the Chava is her arms are strong for the task, but the Rachel is basically God's in charge of life and death. And so for me, it's I have to show up and do my part. Hashem does Hashem's part, right?
Yes.
And both of those are true.
I mean, you've just beautifully articulated the core Jewish idea of covenant, right? Like, the
talk
core
about that.
Jewish theological model is not God up in the sky, you know, ordering around little peons down below. That's not what happens.
Right.
If you read the Torah, God, after helping free these helpless Israelite slaves, God assembles them at the base of a mountain, Mount Sinai, and God says, listen, I'm offering you a covenant. Like, I want to have a partnership with you, an agreement with you. If you observe these laws, I will protect you. And the Israelites had to decide whether they wanted to accept that covenant.
Right.
And you're right, it was a partnership, right? They had to do their part, God would do God's part. God was not looking for a servant or for, puppets. God was looking for a partner. And I love the way you said it, right? You do your part, I'll do mine. That's the exact model of Jewish relation with the divine.
Right. So, if you're just tuning in out there, this is the Dr. Elisa Show on KUHS Denver with my amazing guest, Sarah Hurwitz, who was Michelle Obama's speechwriter, and in that time took a spiritual journey back to her roots. And what we're talking about is that journey. I encourage you, if you're listening and wondering how this relates to you, to remember we're using words about Judaism, but we are spiritually multilingual. This is in your faith tradition. I'm sure it is. When we go deeper into any philosophical, spiritual, religious foundation, we find similar things, but different words. So thank you for tuning in, and we're gonna keep going because this is too fun. So Sarah, we've mentioned a few times, we've talked about Torah, which is can be called Jewish scriptures. If you're Christian, you would call it the Old Testament. And we've also mentioned Talmud. Can you clarify those pieces for us?
Yes. So the Torah is as you said, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible, of what Christians call the Old Testament, what Jews call the Tanakh. Mm-hmm. And this was, created. The Torah was put together 2,500 years ago, and it includes a lot of materials that are even older than 2,500 years. Mm-hmm. So you can't live by a 2,500-year document, right. Old document, literally, because times change. Mm-hmm. So what happened is, basically, since the Torah was published, people have been interpreting it. So the Talmud is basically our interpretations of the Torah by a bunch of rabbis from roughly the year, 70-ish. Well, it's all kind of vague and ancient, but it's about 500-600 years of interpretations mm-hmm. of the Torah. And then we've actually continued to interpret it since then. So if you actually look at a page of many publications of the Talmud, you see this kind of inner text, which is the Mishnah, which was this kind of earliest part of the Talmud. Then around that is other text, the Gemara, which is the interpretation of the Mishnah. And then around that, you have other interpretations that are later, and around that, other interpretations. So it's basically like a conversation between rabbis and scholars over centuries. It's quite fascinating to look at.
Right. I love the notion that we're people of the book, because when you look at a page of Talmud, there's all the stuff in the middle, and then every corner around the edges is written in, which is of course how I treat books, right? You got blank spaces here. You're supposed to write in them, right? Isn't that what a book is supposed to do?
Oh my gosh, yes.
So when when you wrote your book, and this is sort of just coming to mind. So here you are, you're a speechwriter. In a separation of church and state world, you're being influenced and you're growing in this sense of sort of spirituality and Jewish law. How did you bring those together? How did that affect you?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I have my political life and I have my Jewish life, mm-hmm. but they are in many ways connected, right? I think about, first of all, they're connected in terms of the basic values that I felt like I was working to promote. I think about, if I were to sort of look at the core Jewish ethic, I think of the fact that this God in the Torah, as I said, frees these Israelites from slavery in Egypt, assembles them at the base of a mountain, and says to them, your job is to create a society that is the exact opposite of Egypt. A society that doesn't worship kings or pharaohs or emperors, mm-hmm. but that cares most deeply about the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the poor. That's your mission, right? Your mission is to create a society that's the exact opposite of Egypt. And when I think about what I was doing in the White House working for the Obamas, that's what they were doing, right? That's what they were working towards. And, the core idea that we're all created in the divine image with those 3 inalienable dignities, that's what they were working towards every single day. So I think my politics and my Judaism connected that way. I also think my job as a speechwriter was very similar to what I was doing in the book, because as a speechwriter, you're trying to translate. You're trying to kind of make things clear for people, and I was really trying to channel Mrs. Obama's voice and kind of, you spend a lot of time trying to take these complicated policy ideas and translate them into clear, accessible language. And that's what I was trying to do with Judaism, to just translate a little bit, to kind of share this tradition, which can be complicated, as you know. It can sometimes feel a little bit inaccessible. I wanted to do some translation for people to share what I found. So I think those are the two main connections.
So I'm going to ask you one more question that I heard you mention in your speech, and then I promise I'm going to connect it back to Judaism. You had this story about writing a speech for Michelle Obama about her daughters going off to school. Do you remember that story?
I do, yes.
Can you, because there's a richness in how the story you built around that experience. Can you just tell that?
Yes. So Mrs. Obama, it was her 2016 Democratic Convention speech, and she started that speech by talking about how on her daughter's first day of school, when they first moved into the White House, she's watching these little girls climb into these big black cars with these large men with guns, and she sees their little faces pressed up against the window, and she asked herself, like, what have I done? And, she used that story to get into the theme of the speech, which was, this election is all about our children. It is all about the future of our children. That was what the speech was about.
So you have this gift of telling story, and now I'm going to move us back. Torah is story. Talmud is discussion, but it has a lot of story in it also.
Yes.
And I don't even actually know the question, but there's something about richness of story that you are profoundly elegant at utilizing, and it's part of Judaism. I can't make that a question. Can you comment on that?
Oh, I mean, I 100% agree. So much of Judaism is taught through stories, right? Like the most, I think about, I keep thinking about when I was learning the Jewish laws of speech, this story that is just stuck in my head and I can't ever get rid of it is about this guy, in some village back in the day who didn't like the rabbi of the town much, so he goes around saying all these nasty things about the rabbi because he doesn't like him, and then he feels bad. So he actually goes to the rabbi and confesses and says, "Am I forgiven?" And the rabbi says, "I'll forgive you, sure, but first you need to take this feather pillow and scatter the feathers to the wind and then come back." The guy says, "Well, this is strange, but okay." He does it, scatters the feathers to the wind, comes back to the rabbi and says, "Now am I forgiven?" And the rabbi says, "First you have to go gather up all the feathers." And the guy says, "Well, that's not possible." And the rabbi says, "Same thing with the rumors you spread. Can't get them back. Right? Once those feathers have been released, you're not going to get them back." Man, what a powerful story about the danger of gossip and the danger of spreading malicious rumors, right? It's like that story taught me that law far more effectively than just someone telling me gossip and rumors are bad.
Right. Yes.
You don't get it, right? And that power of story is woven throughout Judaism. I think you're exactly right.
So, and again, I mean, the fact that what we're told is so personal. We're back to here's an intimate story to tell you how to live in a world, and what this boundless energy we call Hashem or God or Spirit or whatever we call it is trying to get you to do. And so stories are a way to link that unknowable with something that we can understand. Right?
Yes, absolutely. It makes it concrete. Our brains aren't really meant to sort of process like lists of adjectives or just laws. Our brains work in images and stories. That's something that's so fundamental, because that image now that you have of the rabbi and the feathers and the pillow, if I tell you my friend John is anxious, uptight, obsessive, neurotic, compulsive, if I tell you my friend John one day in my kitchen alphabetized my spice rack and centered all the magnets on my refrigerator because he couldn't stand things being out of place, you'd probably have a better sense of my friend John, right? That's a story. Right.
The same way that Michelle Obama seeing the little girls' faces pressed up, as opposed to saying, "I was really anxious the first day my daughters went off to school," and every parent can relate to this story. Right?
And that came from her, I was channeling her. Makes me, whenever people say, "Oh, you put words in her mouth," I mean, sorry, you met this. You've seen this woman, Michelle Obama knows who she is, and she knows what she wants to say, and I learned to type very quickly when she spoke. So that was how that went down.
So I know we've already talked about God a bit, and this sort of notion of God and Hashem. What I do want to sort of just add to the conversation, and then we'll move over, because I keep saying Hashem. And we talked about before that we don't actually know. Do you want to expand on that? The sort of notion of God is bigger than what so many people think, Torah, Old Testament, whatever teaches?
Yes, and I love that I love the word Hashem as well, because it means the name, right? And certain people, they'll say that because it's almost like, I love it because it's like we can't even give God a specific name, right? It's so, there's something very humble about that, and it also has kind of a warmth to it. I don't know, I think that's a great name for God. But yeah, I do think that we have an incredible humility about the divine, some sense that we're just not going to try to shrink it down, because when you do that, you see what happens, right? You have God who endorses a certain political candidate, or who hates gay people, who has thoughts about women. I mean, God, this Anne Lamott, the writer, has a wonderful quote about, you've created God in your own image when he hates all the same people that you do. Okay, like that's what we see. And I think a lot of Jews look at this kind of modern conversation about religion in American life, which is so often privileges the loudest, most hateful and stupid and bigoted voices who are talking about who God hates and all of this, and they think, well, okay, that's God. I'm too smart for that. That's just appalling to me. That's not the divine, right? That is human beings manipulating the divine for their own very small and ugly purposes. The divine is something far bigger and greater. And we as Jews think that it calls us to a certain moral purpose, a certain way of life. And guess what? Other faith traditions feel that the divine calls them to live a certain moral purpose or way of life. And by the way, a lot of similarities, it turns out, in the basic morals of religions, but also a lot of differences in how we actually live this out. And I think it's important to recognize both the similarities, but importantly the differences. When people say like, oh, all religions are the same, it's all about like love your neighbor and help others. Yes, there's a specific approach that each one has.
Yes.
When people say to me, well, social justice is my Judaism, it's like, well, that's beautiful. It's also your Christianity and your Buddhism and your Islam and your Hinduism, right? Judaism has this specific approach to social justice, as do these other traditions.
So let's talk about that, because that was actually my next question, that Judaism does have a unique approach to social justice. And the other thing about Judaism is it is diverse. So everything from ultra-Orthodox to Reconstructionist or renewal, and right, everything in between, and a lot of flow between those. And there are some Jews who will say, well, Judaism is social justice, but there's a tweak in there. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I mean, the tweak is that we have this very specific approach to social justice, right? Like, you can say, well, okay, it's about social justice, it's about helping the vulnerable. Well, that's great. Everyone believes that, right? Secular people, people of all faiths. But okay, what's the Jewish approach to helping the vulnerable? Well, you're looking at many, many pages of law, right? In terms of, okay, how do you respect someone's dignity and autonomy? How do you not humiliate them? I mean, there's even a Jewish law that says that someone who's the recipient of financial aid, they have to also give financial aid to others. Meaning, because no one should feel just like a taker, people should feel like a giver too. That's a very specific Jewish approach to giving financial assistance to people. And there's a lot where that came from. So I think, Jewish social justice is very much in the details of Jewish law, which prescribes a certain approach to helping those in need, to fighting for justice. And it's important for us to learn that.
I do think that theme, and that, let me back up. Because we do this in stories, some of the stories seem archaic, and yet they make perfect sense as we reinterpret. So if you're harvesting the field, you're supposed to leave the corners so people can come and gather. Now, gathering is an action. They actually have to work. They get food, but they worked for it. They gathered. And again, it's a way of honoring and respecting someone as opposed to just handing them a bushel of grain and saying, here. They're helping you glean the field, right? So, okay, I don't have a field. I barely have a garden, right? I don't grow things, right? How do we interpret that? How do I then recognize, and this is sort of a pondering, and then maybe also a question for you. How do I recognize that if I help someone, I have to help them in a way that honors and respects and gives them a sense of pride at the same time, like you said, so they're not just receiving. So when I say on my radio show, I want us all to be a philanthropist, in part, that's what I'm saying. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There is a real strain of Jewish thinking that the best way to give to someone is to give them a loan, to give them a job, to sort of do something that allows them to use their own power, that allows them to, kind of provide for themselves. So I think you're right that is kind of that's like the highest level of giving. I think Maimonides, who's a Jewish philosopher, he has this kind of list of these levels of the best ways to give and the worst ways to give, and the best are a loan and a job. So I think it's thinking about, am I giving to someone in a way that empowers them, that respects their dignity and autonomy? So giving anonymously is encouraged, because they don't need to know, right? They don't need to feel indebted to you. Right. People don't need to know. There are ways that when you sort of think about it, it's actually changed the way I think about giving. I don't think I was conscious of this before studying these laws, and now I actually do put some thought into, okay, am I doing this in a way that's empowering, that's respectful, that is, anonymous? That's how I try to do it.
Wow. It is this other piece about Judaism that I love, that there's charity, but then there's tzedakah. And tzedakah meaning justice. And here's one of the things, we've got all these laws, and it sounds like early scientific, maybe. And then we've got this thing about, we also believe in luck. So, which is, and in fact, the word mazel tov, mazel is the stars. So wishing you good astrology, basically, good stars, good luck. And the notion is that right now I'm lucky. I'm really lucky. I'm prosperous. And it is only just that I share that. Oh, and by the way, it might not last. And when you're at the other end of that wheel, you're hoping your community is just and helps you. And so here we have this notion of giving that's embedded in, and we know that there's unpredictability, and you can be a really good person and things can go wrong. And so that's still there.
Absolutely. I think that you're absolutely right? There is this sense that we don't truly own what is ours. In a way, there's a sense in the Torah that God owns it and has given it to us to use, right? And so when and look, Torah, there's certainly protection of property rights in the Torah and Jewish law. We are not communists, but there is a sense that you're pretty lucky, right? A lot of what you've gotten is due to your luck. It's due to your health. It's due to your privilege. I mean, you have to have some humility and some gratitude for that. And you're right. The response is to give. And you're right, tzedakah, it's like tzedakah is like fair rules in a courtroom, right? You don't have just procedures in a courtroom just when you feel like it out of the goodness of your heart. You have it always. It's mandatory for justice. Tzedakah is mandatory. It's not, when I feel good, I'll give. No, you give tzedakah. It's an obligation. There's no whether or not you want to.
Right. So believe it or not, we've talked for almost an hour. We literally have 2 minutes left. I know, 2 minutes left on the show. What still inspires you?
Oh my gosh, about Judaism, about anything.
About whatever, right? It's been a hard year for everybody. And what still inspires you?
I am just incredibly inspired by a lot of the young people out there who are just these amazing young activists, whether it's Greta Thunberg on climate change, whether it's the young people who are fighting for common sense gun reform. I'm so impressed by their passion and by their energy. That really moves me. And I'm so inspired by the way people just stepped up heroically in the pandemic. I mean, the first responders, doctors, medical professionals. Absolutely. I mean, it is just what people have been through and are still going through. It just boggles the mind, and I'm tremendously inspired by them and by their strength and their courage and by the depth of what they've given of themselves. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to a lot of people in this country.
Absolutely. And with that, I need to thank you for being on the show. This has been absolutely amazing, and you're more than welcome back at some time. If you missed it, this has been the Dr. Elisa Show on KUHS Denver, the stream. You will be able to listen to and watch this amazing conversation again on the Dr. Elisa Show on Facebook, on elisarobin.com, my website, on my YouTube channel, I think on Twitter, no telling where it will show up. And what I wish for you is, I'm on every other week. I have an amazing guest also next week. But what I hope for you this week is that you stay well. You listen to that still, small voice within you, and that you stay inspired.